There is a terrifying secret about human psychology that most people will spend their entire lives running away from. The person you are right now, your habits, your fears, your quiet insecurities, the voice that tells you to give up when things get hard, that person was not designed to make you victorious. That person was designed to keep you safe, comfortable, and weak. And as long as you keep trying to edit, polish, or negotiate with that old version of yourself, you will remain trapped in the exact same cycle of disappointment. Real transformation doesn't come from minor improvements. It requires an execution. It requires you to look at your old self, destroy every bridge that leads back to your past, and build an entirely new human being from the ashes. What if the reason you keep falling back into old habits isn't because you lack willpower, but because you are trying to build a fortress on top of a rotten foundation? What did the ancient Stoic masters do when they needed to completely erase their past identity and resurrect a version of themselves that felt no fear, knew no hesitation, and possessed absolute mastery over their own destiny? Stick with me, because the secrets of radical self-destruction and rebirth are about to rewrite the rules of your life forever. To understand what it takes to completely rebuild yourself, you must first learn the story of a man who held everything the world told him to desire, only to lose it all in a single afternoon. His name was Dio of Prusa, later known across the empire as Dio Chrysostom, or Dio the Golden-Mouthed. Dio was not born a warrior or a rugged philosopher. He was born into immense, suffocating wealth. He was an elite aristocrat, a master of flattering the powerful, and a favorite in the imperial courts of Rome. He spent his youth writing clever, shallow speeches for rich men, indulging in luxury, and measuring his worth by the applause of high society. He was, by every modern standard, successful. But his identity was entirely hollow. He was a creature of comfort, defined completely by his social standing, his reputation, and his bank account. Then, the storm arrived. The paranoid Emperor Domitian took the throne of Rome. In a wave of political purges, Dio was accused of conspiring with the emperor's enemies. In a matter of hours, his property was confiscated, his fortune was erased, and Domitian issued a brutal decree: Dio was banished from Rome and his home province under pain of immediate death. If he stepped foot in civilized society, if he was recognized by a single Roman soldier, he would be executed on the spot. Imagine walking out of a palace wearing silk robes, and by nightfall, standing on the dusty outer fringe of the empire with nothing in your pockets but a single tunic, a dagger, and a copy of Plato's dialogue. Most human beings in Dio's position would have collapsed into sorrow. They would have wept for their lost wealth, begged for a pardon, or spent their remaining days drinking away their shame in dark taverns. The soft, spoiled aristocrat that Dio had been for 40 years was screaming for survival. Dio realized something profound in the dirt outside Rome. He looked at his ragged clothes, looked down at his dirty hands, and realized that the soft, fearful aristocrat was already dead. The empire had executed his identity, but it had spared his breath. And in that moment, Dio made a terrifying decision: he would not try to rebuild his old life. He would kill the memory of the man he used to be. He let his hair grow wild. He wrapped himself in a cheap, coarse wool cloak. He refused to tell anyone his real name or his former status. For over a decade, Dio wandered the frozen wilderness of the northern frontier on foot. He worked as a ditch digger, a farm hand, and a manual laborer alongside slaves and outcasts. Whenever his body screamed with exhaustion, whenever he remembered the warm baths and soft beds of Rome, he didn't pity himself. He forced his mind deeper into discipline. He used manual labor to harden his soft body, and he used isolation to purge his soul of vanity, greed, and fear. Years passed. The paranoid Emperor Domitian was assassinated in his palace. Deep on the northern frontier, a massive Roman army legion received the news. The soldiers were furious, terrified, and on the brink of a massive, bloody mutiny that threatened to plunge the entire empire into civil war. They gathered in their armor, shouting, waving weapons, ready to march on Rome and burn it to the ground. Out of the surrounding forest walked a tall, lean man wearing a beggar's rags. His skin was weather-beaten, his face was carved from stone, and his eyes held an unshakable, terrifying calm. The soldiers laughed and ordered the beggar to step aside. Dio Chrysostom walked right into the center of the angry legion, climbed onto an overturned wooden supply wagon, and threw off his beggar's cloak, standing bare-chested before thousands of armed, furious men. He didn't scream. He didn't tremble. The soft aristocrat was long gone. Standing before them was a sage who had conquered hunger, cold, exile, and fear. Dio opened his mouth and began to speak. His voice cut through the cold air like a thunderclap. He spoke with such raw, hypnotic authority, such profound philosophical truth about duty, virtue, and peace, that thousands of battle-hardened soldiers fell completely silent. By the time he finished speaking, men were weeping. Weapons were lowered. The mutiny was over. Dio did not return to Rome as the weak, soft man who had been exiled. He returned as a titan, an advisor to emperors, a living symbol of an unbreakable mind. Let that sink in. Dio didn't fix his old self. He conquered it. He used total ruin as a furnace to burn away the weak, vain, fragile identity he had carried for decades, forcing a far stronger human being to take its place. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of the weakness you feel today comes from holding on to an old identity that should have been buried years ago? We stay attached to our past mistakes, our past failures, and our past labels. We tell ourselves, I am just a lazy person. I am bad with money. I am too anxious to speak up. I have always been this way. Every time you repeat those sentences, you are digging a grave for your future self. You are nursing a ghost. You are keeping a dead version of yourself on life support because it feels safer to be predictably weak than to face the terrifying pain of rebirth. The ancient Stoics understood that self-improvement is a trap if it does not begin with self-destruction. You cannot paint over rust and expect the iron to hold. You must strip the rust down to the bare metal. Consider the dramatic tactical decision made by the ancient commander Agathocles of Syracuse. Agathocles was facing a desperate military crisis. His home city was under siege by the immensely powerful army of Carthage. The odds were impossible. His citizens were panicking, his supplies were running out, and defeat seemed inevitable. Agathocles knew that if he fought a defensive war, his men would slowly lose morale, crumble, and surrender. So he gathered his remaining troops, loaded them onto ships under the cover of night, and sailed straight across the sea directly to the shores of North Africa, the home territory of Carthage itself. The moment his army stepped off the boats and onto enemy soil, Agathocles did something that horrified his generals. He ordered his men to take torches and set fire to every single one of their own ships. Imagine standing on a foreign beach, watching the giant wooden ships that brought you there turn into roaring infernos. You watch the planks blacken, the sails burn, and the frames collapse into the sea. The soldiers panicked. They ran to the water shouting, "How will we ever get home? What if we lose? How will we retreat?" Agathocles turned around, looked at his terrified army, and pointed his sword toward the enemy capital. He said calmly, "You wish to go home? Then you must conquer Carthage. The only way off this beach is through victory." By burning his own ships, Agathocles eliminated the mental option of retreat. He forced every soldier in his army to undergo an instant, violent psychological shift. The option to give up was no longer on the table. They couldn't run back to safety because safety no longer existed. They had to win, or they had to die on that sand. And because they had no alternative, they fought with an aggressive, unstoppable fury that shocked the world, breaking the power of Carthage and securing their freedom. How many ships are you still leaving anchored in your harbor? How many safety nets, backup plans, and comfortable excuses are you keeping around just in case things get tough? When you keep your old clothes in the closet, when you stay in touch with people who drag you down, when you keep your old bad habits within arm's reach, you are telling your brain that retreat is always acceptable. You are giving your old, weak identity a guaranteed path back into your life. The moment stress hits, the moment a challenge gets difficult, your brain will sprint right back to those burnable ships and sail straight back to comfortable failure. To rebuild yourself, you must burn the ships. You must make staying the same so uncomfortable, so impossible, that moving forward into strength becomes your only viable option for survival. This brings us to the psychological mechanics of the transformation itself. How do you actually kill the old version of yourself without waiting for a tragedy or an emperor's decree to force your hand? The Stoics relied on a fundamental truth: your character is not a fixed, genetic reality. Your character is simply the cumulative result of what you tolerate from yourself on a daily basis. When you tolerate laziness, you become lazy. When you tolerate small lies, you become dishonest. When you tolerate fear, you become a coward. The old version of you isn't a monster, it is simply a collection of bad standards that you have passively allowed to rule your mind. To conquer the old you, you must establish an absolute regime of internal discipline. You must become the ruthless architect of your own standards. Epictetus used to ask his students a question that should haunt your mind every single morning: how long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? How long are you going to let an outdated, fragile, emotional version of you run the show? How many more Mondays will you waste promising that you'll change next week? How many more years will you throw away watching other people build legendary lives while you sit in the bleachers of your own destiny? The rebuilding process requires 3 distinct phases of mental warfare. The first phase is the audit of weakness, a brutal, uncompromising inventory of every lie, every habit, and every excuse that your old self relies on to survive. The second phase is the voluntary execution, the systematic elimination of comfort zones through deliberate physical and mental friction. And the third phase, the phase that seals your transformation forever, is the construction of your unshakable blueprint, a daily protocol that makes it biologically and psychologically impossible for you to ever fall back into the weak patterns of your past. Most people never make it past the first phase because they cannot bear the pain of looking at their own flaws. They prefer comfortable illusions over painful truths. Whenever you are ready to unlock these 3 phases, destroy your old limitations, and step into the second half of this blueprint, simply let me know to continue, and we will begin the reconstruction. Let's step directly into that first phase of reconstruction, stripping away the lies you have been telling yourself for years. Most people live in a state of perpetual self-deception. When they fail, when they procrastinate, when they give in to weakness, they invent clever stories to protect their fragile ego. They blame their genetics, their upbringing, their boss, or the lack of time. But if you want to conquer the old version of yourself, you must perform a ruthless, merciless audit of your own spirit. Look in the mirror and ask yourself the question you have been avoiding: what lies am I telling myself to justify my own mediocrity? When you answer that question with brutal, uncompromising honesty, you take away the old self's favorite weapon: excuses. You realize that you aren't stuck because of external circumstances, you are stuck because you keep choosing the easy path every single morning. To understand what it looks like when a human being builds an identity that no external force on earth can destroy, look at the ancient city of Megara in the year 307 BC. The city was invaded and completely destroyed by the ruthless military commander Demetrius, known to history as the Besieger. Demetrius's soldiers tore through the streets, burning homes, looting gold, and dragging citizens into slavery. The entire city was reduced to smoking, black ash. Living in Megara was a Stoic philosopher named Stilpo. In the destruction of the city, Stilpo lost everything. His house was burned to the ground. His possessions were stolen. His family was scattered and captured in the chaos. He was left standing in the middle of a ruined street with nothing but the dust on his skin and the ragged tunic on his back. Demetrius, the conqueror, saw Stilpo standing near the smoking ruins of his home. Curious to see the grief and despair of a man who had lost everything, Demetrius rode his horse up to the philosopher, looked down at him, and asked with mock pity, "Stilpo, have you lost anything in this fire?" The surrounding soldiers waited for Stilpo to break down, weep, or beg the conqueror for mercy. Instead, Stilpo looked up at the armed warlord riding the high horse, adjusted his dusty tunic, and spoke words that stunned the entire army into absolute silence. "I have lost nothing, my lord. All my goods are still with me, my virtue, my wisdom, my character, and my mind. Everything that was burned today belonged to the city, not to me." Let that sink in. Demetrius had burned down the buildings, stolen the gold, and destroyed the walls, but he couldn't touch Stilpo's mind. Stilpo had built a self that was completely independent of external wealth, status, or comfort. The conqueror realized that despite all his armies, catapults, and swords, he was powerless against a man who owned himself. Demetrius left Megara in awe, ordering his guards to leave the philosopher in peace. That is the power of a rebuilt mind. When your identity is tied to your house, your clothes, your job, or the approval of others, you are weak. Any storm can blow your foundation away. But when you build an identity rooted in internal discipline, virtue, and unshakable character, you become invincible. Fires can burn your wealth, economic shifts can destroy your job, people can betray you, but they can never touch the fortress you have constructed inside your own mind. Now, how do you forge that level of strength? This brings us to the second phase of transformation, the discipline of voluntary friction. The old version of you loves comfort. It craves the warm bed, the junk food, the mindless scrolling, and the easy way out. Every time you give in to those cravings, you feed the weak version of yourself. You make the monster stronger. If you want to kill that old identity, you must deliberately introduce friction into your daily life. You must force yourself to do hard things simply because they are hard. When your alarm goes off in the morning, the old you whispers, "Just 10 more minutes." That is the exact moment the war begins. Do not negotiate. Do not hesitate. The second you feel that hesitation, crush it. Get out of bed immediately. Step into a cold shower. Go for a run in the rain. Read a dense, difficult book when your brain wants cheap entertainment. You aren't doing these things just for physical health or productivity, you are doing them to train your nervous system. You are teaching your brain a new, fundamental law: I do not take orders from my impulses. My mind commands, and my body obeys. Every time you choose the hard path over the easy one, you drive a spike into the coffin of your old self. You begin to develop a cold, quiet confidence because you know, deep in your bones, that you can endure discomfort without flinching. Finally, we arrive at the third phase, constructing your unshakable daily blueprint. Rebuilding yourself is not a one-time event, it is a daily, relentless ritual. The old version of you does not die quietly. It sits in the dark corners of your mind, waiting for a moment of stress, exhaustion, or doubt to crawl back out and take control. This is why you must establish a daily armor before the world even touches you. When Marcus Aurelius woke up every morning in his cold military tent, surrounded by war and sickness, he didn't wait for the day to dictate his mood. Before he saw a single soldier, before he read a single report, he sat down and wrote to himself. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot distinguish good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good, and I cannot be harmed by any of them. Marcus Aurelius was pre-arming his spirit. He was preparing his mind for the battles of the day so that no insult, no crisis, and no betrayal could ever take him by surprise. You must do the same. Stop waking up, reaching for your phone, and drowning your mind in the noise, drama, and news of the world before you've even opened your eyes. The moment you check your phone in bed, you hand control of your mind to complete strangers. You start your day in a defensive, reactive, anxious state. Instead, win the first hour of your morning. Protect it with your life. Wake up in quietness. Sit with your thoughts. Remind yourself of your mortality. Remind yourself of the person you are actively building. Rehearse the challenges you will face today, and decide in advance how your new, stronger self will respond to them. When you master your morning, you master your day. When you master your day, you master your life. Look back at the person you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. Look at all the pain you endured, all the mistakes you made, and all the time you wasted. Do not look back with regret or shame. Look back with gratitude, because that old self was the raw material that brought you to this exact moment. Thank the old you for surviving the storm, and then politely tell them that their service is no longer required. It is time to step into the fire. It is time to burn away the weakness, the self-doubt, and the fear. It is time to build a human being so disciplined, so calm, and so mentally powerful that nothing on this earth can ever shake your peace again. The blueprint is set. The furnace is hot. The only question left is, do you have the courage to step inside? If you are ready to rewrite your morning ritual and give your mind the ultimate daily armor, do not leave this to chance. Subscribe right now to the Stoic Path for another video titled 5 Stoic Words. Say these 5 Stoic words every morning to reprogram your mind. Kill the old you. Build someone stronger. And step into your ultimate power today.